Darnell Carter adjusted his tie, standing at the courthouse entrance. He had a critical hearing today, one that could change his life. Yet, as he approached the courtroom, a uniformed court officer, Officer Grayson, blocked his path. "Hold on," Grayson said, eyeing him with skepticism. "You can't go in yet." Darnell frowned. "My lawyer is already inside. The judge is expecting me." Grayson folded his arms. "Judge's orders. You wait here." Darnell glanced through the open doors, seeing others, mostly white, walk in freely. His heart pounded. This didn't feel right. A white woman in a business suit approached. "Excuse me, officer. Courtroom 3B. "Right this way, ma'am," Grayson said smoothly, stepping aside for her. Darnell clenched his jaw. He looked at the clock. His hearing was in 5 minutes. "Sir," he tried again. "I really need to be inside." Grayson smirked. "What part of wait don't you understand?" Darnell's fingers tightened into fists at his sides, but he took a deep breath. Causing a scene would only make things worse. From inside, his lawyer, Rebecca Nolan, finally noticed his absence. She stood abruptly, scanning the room, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, my client isn't here. He was right behind me when I entered." Judge Whitmore frowned. "That's highly unusual. Bailiff, check outside." Grayson's smirk faded as the bailiff walked toward the doors. Darnell exhaled, standing tall. This wasn't over. The courtroom doors swung open as the bailiff stepped out, his sharp gaze landing on Darnell. "Sir, are you Darnell Carter?" the bailiff asked. "Yes," Darnell replied, relief washing over him. "I've been trying to get in, but this officer won't let me." The bailiff's eyes flicked to Officer Grayson, who shifted uncomfortably. "Is that true?" Grayson scoffed. "Judge's orders. He needed to wait." The bailiff frowned. "I don't recall any such order." Darnell, his frustration barely contained, gestured toward the courtroom. "My hearing started 5 minutes ago. I have every right to be inside." The bailiff nodded. "Come with me." As Darnell walked past, he caught the flicker of panic in Grayson's expression. Something was off. Why did this officer target him specifically? Inside, the judge's expression darkened as Darnell entered. "Mr. Carter, why weren't you inside when we began?" Rebecca stood up. "Your Honor, my client was deliberately kept outside." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Judge Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "By whom?" Rebecca's voice was firm. "Officer Grayson." Murmurs filled the room. All eyes turned toward the entrance as Grayson stepped inside, his face stiff. The judge's voice was cold. "Officer Grayson, is this true?" Grayson hesitated. I was just following protocol." Judge Whitmore's fingers tapped against his bench. "Bailiff, escort this officer to my chambers, now." The tension in the room was suffocating. Darnell's heart pounded. Something big was happening, and it was far from over. The courtroom was dead silent as the bailiff led Officer Grayson toward the judge's chambers. Everyone's eyes were locked on them, whispers buzzing through the room. Darnell swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing. This was bigger than just him. Judge Whitmore took a deep breath, his gaze shifting between Darnell and Rebecca. "This is highly unusual. Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize for any mistreatment you faced today." Rebecca stepped forward, her voice steady but sharp. "Your Honor, my client didn't just face mistreatment. His rights were violated. He was denied entry to his own hearing, and I have reason to believe this wasn't just a mistake." The judge's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Rebecca pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. "Your Honor, my client recorded the entire incident outside the courtroom." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Darnell felt his pulse quicken. He had recorded it, just in case, but he hadn't expected it to become evidence. Judge Whitmore motioned for the bailiff. "Play the recording." The bailiff took the phone and connected it to the courtroom speakers. A moment later, Officer Grayson's voice filled the room. "I don't care who you are. You're not coming in. You're making a mistake. I'm supposed to be in there. Not my problem. Take it up with someone who cares." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. The judge's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "This," he said, his voice dangerously low, "is unacceptable." Darnell held his breath. The entire courthouse was about to witness justice in action. Judge Whitmore took off his glasses and massaged his temples. The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone waited for his next words, eyes darting between Officer Grayson and Darnell. "This court does not tolerate discrimination," the judge finally said, his voice firm. "Officer Grayson, do you have an explanation for your actions?" Grayson shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, I was just following standard security procedures. I didn't mean any harm. Rebecca scoffed. Standard procedure? Mr. Carter was the only person left waiting outside. You let multiple individuals in before him without so much as checking their names. Judge Whitmore's eyes narrowed. Is that true? Grayson hesitated. The courtroom was dead silent. I might have made a mistake. Darnell clenched his fists. A mistake? That was his excuse? Rebecca shook her head. Your Honor, this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate discrimination. And considering the evidence, I believe this officer should be held accountable. Murmurs spread through the room. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered amongst themselves. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Mr. Carter, how long were you forced to wait outside? Darnell cleared his throat. Over an hour, Your Honor. The judge's expression darkened. And during that time, did Officer Grayson provide any explanation for why you weren't allowed in? No, sir, Darnell said firmly. He just told me to wait. Judge Whitmore exhaled sharply. This is serious. He turned to Grayson. Officer, if you were truly following protocol, then why wasn't Mr. Carter's name checked against the court docket? Grayson had no answer. His face paled. The judge's gaze turned ice cold. I will not tolerate injustice in my courtroom. The entire courthouse was about to witness the consequences of corruption. The courtroom was silent. All eyes were on Judge Whitmore as he stared down at Officer Grayson, who stood frozen, sweat forming on his brow. Officer Grayson, the judge said, his voice firm and unwavering, your actions today raise serious concerns about bias and misconduct in this courthouse. Grayson swallowed hard. Your Honor, I swear. Judge Whitmore raised a hand, cutting him off. I don't want excuses. I want the truth. Did you deliberately prevent Mr. Carter from entering because of his race? Grayson's mouth opened, then shut. He looked around the room, as if searching for an escape. The audience whispered amongst themselves, waiting for his answer. Rebecca leaned forward. Your Honor, I believe it's clear what happened here. Mr. Carter was unfairly treated, and we have witnesses who saw the disparity. Darnell stood tall, his voice steady. All I wanted was fairness, to be treated with the same respect as any other citizen. The judge nodded, and that's exactly what you deserve. He turned back to Grayson. I'm placing you on immediate suspension, pending an investigation into your conduct. Gasps filled the room. Grayson's face turned red. Suspension? But, Your Honor, I will not allow this courthouse to be tainted by discrimination, Judge Whitmore said sharply. And if the investigation proves intentional bias, further legal action will be taken. Grayson looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew there was nothing he could say. The bailiff stepped forward. Officer Grayson, I'll need your badge. With shaking hands, Grayson unpinned his badge and placed it on the judge's desk. Darnell exhaled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Justice was finally being served. But the courtroom wasn't done yet. Something even more shocking was about to be revealed. As Officer Grayson stepped back, face pale, a voice from the back of the courtroom interrupted the silence. Your Honor, if I may speak. Everyone turned. A woman in a sharp navy blue suit stood, her presence commanding. Rebecca recognized her instantly. Jessica Malone, an investigator for the Civil Rights Division. Judge Whitmore narrowed his eyes. Miss Malone, this is unexpected. What do you have to add? Jessica walked forward, holding a thick file. Your Honor, this isn't just about today. Officer Grayson has a history of discriminatory behavior, one that's been quietly ignored for far too long. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Grayson's eyes widened. That's not true. This is just... Jessica slammed the file onto the judge's desk. This contains multiple complaints against Officer Grayson. Reports of delaying Black and Latino citizens at security checkpoints, unnecessary searches, and even cases of outright denying access to people of color, just like he did to Mr. Carter today. Judge Whitmore's face darkened as he flipped through the file. Why was this never brought to my attention? Jessica's lips pressed together. Because every single report mysteriously disappeared before reaching higher authorities. Gasps filled the room. Rebecca clenched her fists. Someone's been covering for him? Jessica nodded, and I intend to find out who. She turned back to Grayson, her eyes cold. But make no mistake, you won't be getting away with it this time. Grayson looked around in panic. This is a setup. The judge slammed his gavel. Enough! Officer Grayson, I suggest you remain silent until legal counsel is present, because this just became a criminal matter. Darnell's heart pounded. He had come here today just to seek basic fairness, but now he was witnessing the start of a much bigger reckoning. The silence that followed Judge Whitmore's words was shattered by an explosion of whispers. The courtroom was electrified. What had started as a simple case of discrimination was now unfolding into a full-scale scandal. Officer Grayson's face twisted with panic. His eyes darted to the court officers standing near the judge's bench, but none of them moved to support him. He was alone. Jessica Malone took a step closer, her voice calm but unyielding. Your Honor, I request that Officer Grayson be placed on immediate administrative leave while this matter is investigated. Grayson's nostrils flared. This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job. Jessica didn't flinch. Was it your job to delay black defendants while allowing white defendants through without issue? Was it your job to erase complaints filed against you? Grayson's jaw tightened. Before he could finish, another voice rang out. I've seen him do it before. All eyes turned to a young black woman seated near the back. She hesitated for only a second before standing. My name is Monica Lewis. I came here last month to support my brother during his trial. Officer Grayson made me wait outside for over an hour, even though white families walked right in. When I filed a complaint, I never heard back. Judge Whitmore turned to the court stenographer. Make sure her statement is recorded. Then, looking back at Grayson, his voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Officer Grayson, do you have anything to say for yourself? Grayson's fists clenched, his face red. He looked around desperately, but the weight of the evidence was crushing him. The courtroom held its breath. Would he admit to what he had done? Or would he fight until the bitter end? The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. All eyes were on Officer Grayson, whose face was a storm of fear, anger, and desperation. Judge Whitmore's voice was sharp. Answer the question, Officer Grayson. Grayson's lips parted, but no words came out. He glanced at the exit as if contemplating making a run for it, but he knew there was nowhere to go. The entire room was against him now. Jessica Malone stepped forward. If you need help remembering, I have the security footage right here. She raised a USB drive, her eyes locked on him. It shows everything. A ripple of shock moved through the spectators. The evidence was irrefutable. Grayson's breathing grew heavier. This is insane. This is a witch hunt. His voice cracked and a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. I was just doing my job. There are rules, procedures. Judge Whitmore cut him off. And yet you applied those procedures selectively. You abused your authority. He turned to the bailiff. Take him into custody, now. Gasps filled the room as two officers moved toward Grayson. Panic flashed in his eyes. He stumbled back, shaking his head. No, wait. But before he could finish, the officers grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. The click of handcuffs locking echoed through the silent room. Tyrone, watching from his seat, let out a slow breath. He had walked in that morning expecting a fight for justice, but he never imagined seeing the very man who had oppressed him being led away in shackles. The system had finally turned on one of its own. But was it enough? The moment the handcuffs clicked around Officer Grayson's wrists, the courtroom exploded with noise. Some people gasped in disbelief, while others murmured in satisfaction. The tension that had been brewing all day finally boiled over. Grayson thrashed against the officers restraining him. This is ridiculous. You can't do this to me, he bellowed, his voice laced with rage and desperation. But the officers held firm. Judge Whitmore's gavel slammed down. Enough, he commanded, his voice slicing through the chaos. This courtroom will remain in order. Jessica Malone turned to Tyrone, a look of pure triumph on her face. You did it. You exposed him. Tyrone, still in shock, swallowed hard. I didn't do this alone, he said. The truth did. In the audience, members of the community whispered amongst themselves. Some were furious that it had taken so long for justice to be served. Others looked at Tyrone with newfound respect, the man who had stood up against corruption and won. But not everyone was celebrating. From the back of the courtroom, a group of uniformed officers exchanged tense glances. Not all of them were happy to see one of their own fall. A few whispered amongst themselves, and one of them, a high-ranking lieutenant, slowly shook his head. Tyrone noticed. He felt their eyes on him. A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't over. As Officer Grayson was dragged toward the exit, he turned, locking eyes with Tyrone. There was no remorse, only hatred. "You think you've won?" Grayson sneered. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Tyrone's fists clenched. He knew Grayson meant it. As Officer Grayson was led out of the courtroom, the tension remained thick in the air. Tyrone could still feel the weight of his hateful glare, even after the doors shut behind him. Jessica exhaled deeply. "We need to be careful," she said under her breath. "Guys like him don't go down quietly." Before Tyrone could respond, Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, I'd like to speak with you and your attorney in my chambers." Tyrone's stomach tightened. Was this good or bad? Inside the judge's office, Whitmore leaned forward, his expression serious. "You stood your ground today, Mr. Johnson. That takes courage, but I need you to understand something." Tyrone nodded, waiting. Whitmore's voice lowered. "Corruption runs deep. Officer Grayson isn't the only one who abuses his power. There are others, people who won't be happy about what happened today." Jessica crossed her arms. "Are you saying he has friends?" Whitmore's expression darkened. "Powerful ones. Ones who may try to make life very difficult for Mr. Johnson." A heavy silence settled over the room. Tyrone's pulse quickened. "So what do I do?" he finally asked. The judge sighed. "Stay vigilant, watch your back, and most importantly, don't stop fighting for justice. You have more eyes on you than you realize." Tyrone clenched his jaw. He had known standing up for himself would have consequences, but now it was clear. He had just made some dangerous enemies. As he and Jessica left the chambers, a courthouse security guard passed by, giving Tyrone a strange look. A look that sent a shiver down his spine. Something wasn't right. As Tyrone and Jessica stepped out of the judge's chambers, an unsettling feeling crept over him. The courthouse, once just an intimidating place of law, now felt like a battlefield. Jessica noticed his tension. "You okay?" Tyrone nodded, but his gut told him otherwise. As they walked through the hall, a security guard, the same one who had given him that strange look earlier, was now on his phone, whispering something while keeping his eyes locked on Tyrone. Tyrone clenched his fists. Was he being paranoid, or was he being watched? Just then, a voice called out. "Tyrone!" He turned to see an older black man in a suit approaching. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Gregory Tate, civil rights attorney." He extended his hand. "I saw what happened in that courtroom. That was powerful." Tyrone shook his hand. "Thanks, but I have a feeling this fight isn't over." Tate nodded gravely. "You're right. Officer Grayson won't take this humiliation lightly. And his allies, they're worse." Jessica crossed her arms. "The judge warned us too. What should we do?" Tate looked around before speaking. "Stay low for now. These people work in shadows. If they can't control you, they'll try to silence you." A chill ran down Tyrone's spine. "Silence me, you mean?" Tate interrupted. "I mean, watch your back, and if anything strange happens, call me immediately." He handed Tyrone his card. "You're not alone in this." Just as Tate walked away, a loud bang echoed through the courthouse. Security guards ran toward the entrance. People screamed. Jessica grabbed Tyrone's arm. "What was that?" Tyrone's pulse pounded. Was this a warning, or the beginning of something worse? The loud bang sent panic rippling through the courthouse. People ducked, whispers turned into shouts, and security scrambled. Tyrone and Jessica exchanged a tense glance before pushing through the crowd toward the entrance. A glass window near the front door had been shattered. Officers surrounded the area, talking into their radios. Jessica whispered, "You think this was meant for you?" Tyrone's jaw clenched. He wasn't sure, but the timing was too perfect. Just then, Officer Grayson stepped back into view, smirking. "What's the matter, Johnson? Feeling nervous?" His voice was dripping with mock concern. Tyrone's fists curled, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was what they wanted, him to lose control. "What happened here?" Tyrone asked one of the security guards. The guard hesitated before answering. "Someone threw a brick through the window. No note, no witnesses." Tyrone's stomach twisted. A silent message, a warning. Jessica grabbed his arm. "We need to go, now." But before they could move, a stern voice rang out. "Mr. Johnson, Miss Reed." Judge Halstead strode toward them, her eyes sharp with concern. She wasn't just a judge right now. She looked like a protector. "Follow me, now." Tyrone hesitated. "Why? What's going on?" Halstead's voice was low but firm. I have reason to believe your life is in danger. Jessica gasped. Tyrone felt his pulse race. If the judge was this worried, things were worse than they imagined. Tyrone and Jessica followed Judge Halstead through a back hallway of the courthouse. The tension was suffocating. Halstead led them into her private chambers and shut the door firmly. She locked it. Tyrone exchanged a look with Jessica. "Judge, what's going on?" Halstead sighed and rubbed her temples. "This isn't just about your case anymore, Mr. Johnson. Someone wants you gone." Jessica's eyes widened. "Gone? You mean?" "Yes." Halstead's tone was grave. "Whoever sent that brick wasn't just trying to scare you. They're trying to silence you." Tyrone took a deep breath. He'd faced discrimination his whole life, but this was different. This was a direct threat. "Do you know who's behind this?" Jessica asked. Halstead hesitated, then nodded. "I have my suspicions." She slid a folder across her desk. Tyrone opened it and felt his blood run cold. Inside were documents, emails, and surveillance photos. Officer Grayson, the bailiff, even the court clerk. Jessica's voice trembled. "They're all working together?" Halstead nodded grimly. "This isn't just racism, Mr. Johnson. It's corruption at the highest level." Tyrone clenched his fists, and they've been getting away with it for years. Halstead's eyes burned with determination. "Not anymore." She leaned forward. "But if you testify tomorrow, you won't just be exposing them, you'll be putting a target on your back." Jessica grabbed Tyrone's hand. The weight of the moment settled in. Tyrone exhaled slowly. He had a choice: walk away or stand up for justice. His voice was steady. "I'm not backing down." Judge Halstead studied Tyrone for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right, if you're willing to fight, then we do this the right way." Jessica frowned. "What do you mean?" Halstead opened a drawer and pulled out a small recording device. "We need evidence that no one can deny. Grayson, the bailiff, the clerk, they've covered their tracks for years. But if we catch them in the act, they won't be able to escape justice." Tyrone folded his arms. "And how do we do that?" Halstead smirked. "We make them think they've won." Jessica's eyes widened. "You want Tyrone to act like he's backing down?" Halstead nodded. "Tomorrow morning, you'll go to court and announce you're withdrawing your case. You'll act like you're scared, like you're running." Tyrone's jaw clenched. "And that'll make them let their guard down?" "Exactly." Halstead leaned forward. "Grayson and his people will celebrate. They'll talk freely, they'll make mistakes, and when they do," Jessica's eyes gleamed, "we'll be recording everything." Tyrone exhaled. It was risky. If they saw through the act, things could get even more dangerous. Halstead must have sensed his hesitation. "Mr. Johnson, this is your chance to end this corruption, but you have to be smart." Tyrone's heart pounded. For years, he had been fighting a system designed to keep people like him silent. Now he had a chance to expose the truth. He looked at Jessica. She gave him a reassuring nod. Tyrone turned back to Halstead. His voice was firm. "Let's set the trap." The next morning, Tyrone walked into the courtroom with his head down. His fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to look defeated. Judge Grayson smirked from the bench. "Mr. Johnson, I assume you've come to your senses?" Tyrone took a deep breath. "Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw my case." Jessica gasped beside him, playing her part. "Tyrone, no! You can't let them win!" Grayson chuckled. "Smart choice, son. Not everyone belongs in a place like this." The bailiff snickered. The court clerk muttered, "Another one who knows his place." But what they didn't know, the recorder in Jessica's pocket was catching everything. Judge Halstead was watching from the back, her phone discreetly streaming the audio to the Attorney General's office. And then, the doors burst open. Federal agents stormed inside. "Judge Grayson, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, racial discrimination, and judicial corruption." Grayson's face turned ghostly white. "What? This is outrageous!" The bailiff reached for his gun, but 3 agents pinned him down. Jessica held up the recorder. "We got it all on tape, every single word." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Lawyers gasped, reporters rushed inside. The entire courthouse was in shock. Tyrone stood tall, his heart pounding. For years, the system had tried to silence him, but today, the truth had won. As Grayson was dragged away, Judge Halstead placed a hand on Tyrone's shoulder. "Justice is slow, but it always comes." Tyrone looked around at the stunned faces. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. If this story moved you, don't stay silent. Share this video to spread awareness about injustice in our legal system. Would you have handled it differently? Comment below and let us know your thoughts. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that expose the truth.